Dave Berg, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks. Good to be here, Mark.
Well, we have a lot to talk about, but especially the book over your shoulder there, Behind the Curtain, your many years, I won't say you're that old, but many years of producing The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. So many great stories that have been in the vault that you finally brought out.
And
But
you've
what,
been a part of many of them.
well, what was your impetus for writing this book?
I think it was the impetus was that I had had all these stories that were going on, and I had the stories because I actually did something that guys don't normally do. I kept a diary.
Ah, that's dangerous these days.
I know, and guys never do it, but it turned out I have been invited annually during that time to speak to about 10 classes at the University of Utah over the course of a week. So throughout the year, I would record my best stories to tell the students in the classes. So I
And
had all these stories to tell.
now, what about that sticky NDA that you had with NBC Universal?
Um, I don't, I don't.
Call the lawyers.
I never heard from them about it.
But obviously, Jay knew about it, and he seemed like he was supportive of it.
Well, he wrote the foreword.
Right. So, so we're all good legally, right, Dave?
That's right.
What? Tell me how you got started. Well, first of all, let's back up to pre that. You grew up in Chicago. Walk us through your story.
Well, I grew up in Chicago, and all I really ever wanted to do was be a top journalist for the Chicago Tribune. That was my goal. And then it changed when I started listening to the radio host, the famous radio host, Paul Harvey.
Yep.
And it turned out my dad knew somebody, and I got to sit in on Paul's radio show. And that really inspired me, so much to the point that after the show, I was so much in awe when he started to ask me questions. I opened my mouth, but nothing could come out. I was just thought Paul Harvey was incredible. And
Yep.
so I think that that was my inspiration.
Boy, Paul was incredible. I grew up every single morning of my childhood with Paul Harvey News and Commentary, a service of ABC News. I think it was 10 minutes long, and you just got an overview of the entire world. And you're right. That was how we got the news. It wasn't Walter Cronkite for me. It was Paul Harvey.
Yes, and I think you might have been getting the news in Japan.
I did, right. I got it through the Armed Forces radio network. But Paul, he just had a way, you're right, he had a way of personalizing the news. And he had these little quirky things he would say. And he had a way of conveying his opinion without being too heavy-handed.
Yes, he did, and he had a style that no one could ever. It was inimitable. It was just amazing.
So he was your inspiration.
He was.
So how did that lead to your work?
Well, I when I went to when I finally went to college, and I ended up at Northwestern. By that time, I had decided to study pre-law, basically political science. But while I was at the university, I worked for the radio station, and I gave newscasts on a regular basis throughout my whole time at Northwestern. And so I think that's what sort of spurred me on to move in that direction.
And so how did you make the move from Chicago to LA?
It's a very circuitous route, Mark. Let's just say I thought I would start in my own hometown and get a job at a television station there, but I was every place I went, I wasn't ready for the big time in Chicago. So I ended up moving to Kansas City, got a job as a reporter for the Kansas City Star. After that, I got a job, believe it or not, for National Public Radio in their early days.
Mm-hmm.
I had a grant to work for NPR. And then at that point, I decided I wanted to make a move into television. And so I started, as basically anybody in television news will tell you, I started in, Green Bay, Wisconsin. You start in the small markets.
Right.
And I'll cut this short because I don't want to go on and on about it.
Keep
But
going.
let's just say they needed a farm director.
A farm director?
Yes, they did. And since I had gotten a master's degree at Kansas State University, where I had done some articles about agriculture, and so I said that I was pretty knowledgeable about farming, and even suggested that I grew up on a farm somewhere in Illinois. I grew up in Chicago. So I got the job of farm director at Sioux City, and then that led to Omaha, Nebraska, to Wichita, Kansas. I've already mentioned Green Bay, Wisconsin, and then to Sacramento. And when I was and doing different jobs, I worked as a reporter. I worked as an executive producer. I worked as an anchor. I gave the weather. And then finally was offered a job at NBC Network News in Burbank. And that's how I got to Los Angeles.
Right, that has got to be the most circuitous path to LA I've ever heard of in the media business.
Yes, and there's even more, but you don't want to hear about it.
So what is it about Chicago? I'm asking this because my father is from Chicago. What is it from Chicago that you've carried with you in your life? People say that about you or that you noticed?
Well, one thing that I've carried with me, which I didn't want to carry, was my Chicago accent. I've spent years trying to lose it, especially because of my on-air jobs. I didn't want to sound like I was from one particular area. But to this day, people say, "Are you from the north side or the south side?"
Really? I don't hear the Chicago accent. That's weird.
Thank you. Bless you, Mark. Thank you so much. And the other thing about Chicago is, and I don't know if it's particular to that area, but to me, Chicago was the center of the world.
Really?
Yeah. And maybe that just came from my parents, but I always thought that was the primary place. And really, that would be the place to get a job, but I could never get a job there.
You know, what I noticed with my father, who was Chicago born and raised, I would bring a friend home from school, to hang out. And the first thing my dad would say would be, "What is he?" And I'm like,
yes.
I don't know. He's my friend Steve. What do you mean, what is he? Like, what is he? Is he Jewish, Italian, Polish? What is he? And I didn't know. And a lot of times Steve didn't know, because we're Americans and we don't think in those ways. But when I went back with my father to visit his hometown, he had the whole place mapped out. Like the Poles are over there and the Jewish guys are over here and the Italians over here. And the whole place was ethnically segregated. And so I realized for the first time, wow, even among like Caucasians, we've overcome a lot of that, at least racial awareness, let's say.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true. And I experienced that. One thing that people who don't live in Chicago or didn't live in Chicago is how prominent the Polish population was.
Right.
It's a huge Polish population. But I used to have a paper route, and this is kind of funny. One night I was collecting, when you have a paper route, you deliver the papers, plus you collect your fees from each house. And one night I was collecting around dinner time at a house on a couple of blocks over from our house. And I smelled this funny smell, which I liked a lot. And it was garlic, but I had never smelled it. So I went back home and I asked my mom, hey, I smelled this funny smell over at the um, um, this house. And she said, which house is it? Who are the people there? And I told her, and she said, oh yeah, those are the Italians.
They use garlic.
Right.
So the Swedes and the Norwegians don't use much garlic in the Berg household?
No. Well, in this Berg household, we use a lot of it because my wife is of Lebanese descent.
Right. So you fixed that. So
Yes,
the Bergs are, as long as you're playing the game, the Bergs are Norwegians or Swedes or
we're
combinations?
Swedes.
Swedes, okay. So were you in a Swedish part of town?
No, not really.
Okay.
Um, we were not in a Swedish part of town, but the town right next to us was Dutch.
Okay.
So you
Close.
are right about, although you wouldn't think that it would be right down to, well, the Dutch people live here. I mean,
Right.
you would, and the Polish people live here. It was really divided up.
You know, the column that got me in the most trouble of my entire column career was a piece that I wrote for USA Today. And I was just saying that in someday, you know, we're all going to be so intermarried that we're all going to look like Mario Lopez, basically. That's the future of America. And I was just making the point that racial divisions are not, I don't think, as strong as political divisions are. And I was anyway. That got me in a lot of trouble. But I think that was really eye opening for me to realize that my father had grown up in a time where, among Caucasian people, there were a lot of prejudices. You know, the Italians are this and the Poles are that. And today, we just I don't think my kids have ever even considered that the Poles or the Italians are a certain way or whatever our parents and grandparents were dealing with. But anyway, you grew up in that. That's what formed you, is
Yes, it
Chicago.
is. Yes.
And I'm guessing the Cubs and deep dish pizza and the whole nine yards.
Um, the Cubs, I'm a big Cubs fan. That's why you asked. The interesting thing about the Cubs, I grew up on the South Side.
Right,
I was on the North Side for a while because I went to Northwestern University. South Siders are White Sox fans.
right,
North Siders are Cubs fans. So
right.
I actually grew up a White Sox fan, even though how could you not root for these great Cubs players such as Ernie Banks?
Right,
So I didn't dislike the Cubs, but I was a Sox fan.
right.
But what happened is I moved, as you know, from town to town to town to town all over the Midwest, as I just explained. And I had one connection to the city of Chicago. And that was WGN television, which carried the Cubs games.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's when I became a big fan of the Cubs.
I see. So later in life.
Yes.
So that means your loyalties switch. So this is interesting, Dave. Your loyalties are you're switchable from the Sox to the Cubs. Okay, this tells us something about your personality and your character. Not to get too Gail Sheehy on you, but this is interesting.
Oh,
Uh,
boy.
by the way, did you ever book Gail Sheehy on the show?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, so we've bounced around the country. You're now somehow magically in NBC Burbank, and then how does that was that in the news department?
I worked for NBC Network News Bureau for about 7 years. And then I went on to help launch CNBC, the business network,
Right.
helped, set it up. And I had a difference of opinion, creative differences, shall we say,
Right.
with CNBC, and they fired me.
Hmm. What were the
They
creative
just,
different? What were the creative differences? Now that we're telling all.
well, I thought that they didn't know how to run a network. They were based on the East Coast,
Right.
and they thought they could treat me like somebody in their newsroom on the East Coast. So when I said, because when I set up the bureau, I was using freelancers. It's not like I had photographers on staff.
Right.
I had to hire freelancers. So I would say we've got a breaking story, or we have this business story happening today at 1:111, and they would never get back to me to approve the cruise, right? And I said, you have to get back to me. I don't have the luxury of waiting for you to approve covering a story that I have to send a crew there in an hour, and
Right.
you don't get back to me for 3 hours. So I'm sorry, I'm going to just have to send out crews without your approval.
Got it.
And that's the kind of way, and they never seem to figure that out.
Right. Okay. Let me also then check. I'll check insubordinate is the next
Yes.
one. All right.
Insubordinate.
Insubordinate. Was Roger Ailes doing it? Was he running at the time? CNBC?
He was not at CNBC at the time. I wish that he had been,
Yeah,
because he turned that network around.
right.
And I know there are a lot of stories about Roger Ailes, and they're not all nice,
Right.
but he knew how to run CNBC, and he knew how to run Fox News, as far as I know.
He did know television way back
Yes.
to the 60s. Okay, so now we've got you at NBC. You get fired by CNBC. How does that lead to the Tonight Show?
Well, what happened is CNBC did what they do to executives. They said, we'll give you a 6-month period. You can use the office because it's easier to get a job when you have a job.
Right.
So I would go into the office every day and make calls. And then one day I was walking down a corridor, which I hadn't done because I was so busy at CNBC. And I noticed it said The Tonight Show with Jay Leno.
Right.
And I thought, well, wait, this is like 3 doors down.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, I didn't know they were there. And they had not been on the air. They had apparently just moved in, and they were setting up shop, and they were hiring. And which I didn't know, but I went back and I called my wife, Mary, and told her, you'll never know who's 3 doors down. And she said, well, who? And I told her, and she said, good. So what are you going to do when you get off the phone? And I said, I know I'm going to keep looking for work. And she said, well, you don't have to go far. It's only 3 doors down.
Right. Genius.
Exactly. Except remember, I had worked at NBC News.
Right.
I had been at NBC for 10 years, and I knew what it was like when Johnny Carson walked past you.
Right.
It was like royalty.
Right.
You know, it was intimidating. I mean, he was not a mean person. He was Johnny Carson.
Right.
And it was like, wow, I'm not even in the same league as this guy. Right. So I'm intimidated by that idea. I'm thinking I'm not even in the same league as him or his show or anything like that.
See,
Plus,
I thought it might just be the opposite of you looking down on the entertainment side because you're a news guy.
Well, that is true. There is that. There was always that sort of contempt for the entertainment side. But when you're sitting there looking at Johnny Carson walking right by you, that contempt really goes away fast.
Plus, you need a paycheck, so that probably helps it disappear.
Yeah. But they also had the Tonight Show. The original executive producer was a very intimidating person. And so I had heard her reputation kind of preceded her. And so I just was kind of intimidated to go down. So when Mary said, why don't you go down there? I thought, yeah, she'll forget about that. But she didn't.
Now, that's that really tall woman, right?
She wasn't really tall.
Who was I thinking of? I had a friend whose mother used to produce the Leno show, but she was very tall.
Maybe she was a producer there.
Yeah. Anyway.
Maybe, was it the Leno show or was it Carson?
Leno. Yeah, this was Leno.
Stephanie?
Stephanie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Stephanie.
she was tall. She was a fellow producer.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Nice lady.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's your entry point there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So anyway, but Mary kept calling me back. It was like almost on the hour, right? Have you been down there? What kind of a guy is Jay? Tell me all about him. You know, finally it's 4 o'clock and she said, hey, do you, don't tell me you haven't seen Jay Leno yet. I said, well, it's 4 o'clock now. They're probably wrapping up. I'll go down there first thing in the morning. And she said, oh, really? Did you want to come home for dinner tonight or what? You tell me.
Well, Mary, go Mary.
Yeah. So I go, okay, which is more intimidating? So I went down to the office.
And you got the job right there?
Well, you're close.
Wow.
I walked in. By then it's 4:45. I filled out the paperwork and I didn't even know what to apply for. There was just a receptionist there. I thought there was only a receptionist. And she said, well, tell me what you do. And I said, I'm a news guy. I'm a writer. I'm a producer. She said, well, why don't you fill out to apply for a writer and also as a producer? So I did. I turned it in. It's now 4:55 p.m. And she said, well, congratulations to you. I said, don't tell me I'm being hired. And she said, no, we close out our applications in 5 minutes.
Whoa.
They're closed. We're taking no more applications.
Wow. Mary somehow knew.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And as I'm walking out of the office, the executive producer at the time sort of yelled out to me and said, wait a minute, I just heard everything going on. I didn't know she was there. She was in her office. She calls me in, said, oh, wait, you're a news guy, you're this, you're that. I said, yeah, yes. She said, good, because that's what we're looking for.
Wow, that's amazing.
She said, Jay doesn't just want to do show business. He wants to do newsmakers because that's what he's interested in.
Wow.
So I was hired, 2 days later.
So the moral of that story is listen to your wife.
Oh, yes.
I think
that's the moral.
Right. And seize the day. Don't wait till tomorrow because you would have lost that opportunity.
That's right. And there's another kind of funny story if you want me to tell it.
Please.
Well, we had people at our church praying for me to get a job. And you know how some people are better connected? You feel like they're like closer to God.
Right.
Not that they are, but they just have this sort of spiritual nature. They know how to frame a prayer.
Right.
Well, we had one. Her name was Elizabeth. So she's lifting us up, and she told Mary that I didn't know how to pray for Dave. So what I prayed for is that he wouldn't lose any income in getting the new job.
Okay.
So when I got hired, it turns out the pay was on a weekly basis, virtually the same. There was a $5 difference.
Wow.
And so Mary called up Elizabeth and said, Elizabeth, thank you so much for praying for Dave. But the next time, can you please raise the ante?
Sounds like Mary. Mary should have been your agent too. She probably was.
She effectively was.
Right. Well, that's a great story. So that begins your career. Now, had this program just started at that point?
No, we weren't on the air. We were building the show. We didn't go on the air for another couple of months.
So you were literally there from the very, very beginning.
Right. We're sort of creating it from nothing. Right.
Wow.
And you know how these things go. When you have a new iteration of a show, it's an all new staff, basically.
Yeah.
We kept there were a couple of people from Carson. But that was it.
Take us into the world of the show. Obviously we have a whole new generation who don't even know who Jay Leno is or was. But nevertheless, the principles still stay the same. What is it like being on the inside of a big show like that? And what were your duties, and how many of you were there, first of all, in those producing, writing positions?
There were 4 producers. We were called segment producers.
Okay.
And so, everybody was sort of figuring out how they fit in. And the others, they didn't have anywhere near the background I did. They had come from other shows in the entertainment field. One was an entertainment writer for the Washington Post. One of them had done game shows, those kinds of backgrounds. And so I didn't fit in. I didn't really have any kind of a show business background, with the exception of I had done a stint when I was at NBC News as the producer for the Today Show.
Mm-hmm.
So in that position, I would book interviews with celebrities from the West Coast.
Right.
But other than that, my Rolodex was to, politicians, newsmakers. That's what we went back when we had Rolodexes.
Right.
And so there was sort of an attitude of, well, what can you do to help us?
Mm.
So it took me a long time to sort of say, well, there are some other guests who might really add some ratings that you're not aware of. Like, for instance, I suggested back in the day, you may recall how popular Rush Limbaugh was.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, whether you like him or not, he has more listeners than we're going to have viewers. So just be aware of that. Somebody like that might bring some viewers. And it's like I was, an alien from another planet.
Did you have him on?
Yes. A number of times. Yeah. And so, I would, keep making suggestions. I also introduced the idea of having political figures on. And if you go back in time, if you look at Johnny Carson, it's not like he had a lot of political guests.
Right.
Maybe 10 or so. And he was friends with
He had Ronald Reagan on. I remember that.
They were friends.
Right.
So I suggested that. Now, today it's gotten out of hand with the political guests because now we've got an agenda going on.
Right. What year was this that you started there, Dave?
Sorry, what?
What year was this? Was this 92?
Yeah. It was 92. Exactly. Right. It was 1992. And the funny thing, what's really funny is that Bill Clinton came to us. And this may have been our biggest mistake. Bill Clinton came to me and his people. And if you remember, early in his campaign, he was kind of a throwaway candidate.
Right.
The Democrats just tried to find somebody to run against Bush. They figured they had no chance.
Right.
So Clinton's people come and they say, Bill Clinton wants to do your show. We know Jay Leno is a big Elvis Presley fan. He plays the saxophone. He can come as Elvis. He can play the saxophone. And you can ask him anything. All questions are on the table. If you know anything about the Clintons, all questions are never on the table.
Right.
Everything is controlled with those two.
Right.
But there was an issue going on at the time. He made a funny remark, actually, that he had smoked marijuana but never inhaled.
Right.
And was very sensitive about it. But again, all questions were on the table. And I brought this. Now, this is the executive producer, remember, who wanted someone with a journalistic background.
Right.
Who was excited about bringing different guests into the show. So I brought up the idea of Bill Clinton. And she said, Bill Clinton? Who is he? Who would want him?
Let me answer that question. Let me answer that question. Arsenio's Booker?
Yeah, you just took away my punchline. But you're right. You're absolutely right. And then she said, and if we have him on, then we're going to have Bush on. Why would we want him? And so there was no getting around that. And so guess where Bill Clinton went? You already said it. It was Arsenio Hall. And guess what? Bill Clinton's numbers, the polls, shot up after he made that appearance they shot up, particularly among young people
Right.
and blacks. They really liked it, and there are political commentators and historians who say that the appearance on Arsenio Hall might have launched his career and made it possible for him to go on and win the presidency.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. Wow. So you just faced a lot of not even necessarily partisan, although I'm sure you faced some partisan opposition to wanting to have guests like Rush Limbaugh. You just also faced the systematic or the systemic desire not to have politicians on.
Right, because they were just used to having, people from TV shows and movies and then musicians.
Yeah.
That's what it was all about.
You know,
Just your standard celebrities.
I didn't know you back then, but I had a TV show that aired in Japan, of all places, and I interviewed Jay in '96. And we spent the evening there, getting B-roll, and then spent time with him in one of the green rooms. But what really struck me about Jay, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is he's a very serious person. Which maybe it's the nature of comedians that you spend your entire work day being funny, that you're sort of done with the funny. But he just struck me as being very, very serious and thoughtful.
Well, you've nailed it. He is a very thoughtful man. And while we're at it, I will just say that he's also the same in front of a camera as behind a camera. But he was a serious person. The show was not, for him, he understood that it was a business. That it wasn't just about, for him, show business had two words. It was not only about the show, but it was about the business.
Right.
So every morning, and this may sound routine that everyone would do it these days, but every morning we would have the overnight ratings. And again, everything is statistical these days, not so much back then. So we would see how the show did in each quarter hour. Now, we knew the monologue would do really well. The crucial point after that was, would the guests hold the ratings? Because the show was rated based on an hour. So if a certain person did not bring in the ratings as the first guest, they might not be invited back as the first guest.
I see.
Now, our competition, Letterman, didn't do that. We knew what he did. He would just keep inviting back the same people. Whatever they did in the ratings, they would just keep coming back. We would make changes based on the ratings.
Wow. So what would rate well? Were there any surprises, like to some of your colleagues there, that some of the guests that you were booking were getting good ratings, for instance?
Yes, there were a lot of surprises. I think they were surprised, for instance, my first political guest that I booked was Bob Dole.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were surprised at the reaction we got in the press. Whenever we would make a booking like that, because he was, considered a leading contender for president at the time.
Right.
And he came on and was funny. He was actually, Bob Dole had a good sense of humor and got a huge response. The other thing that surprised them was that guests that they never figured would bring in ratings, such as, say, Rush Limbaugh, brought in huge ratings. And also, I was really, really big on bringing in sports heroes.
Right.
Especially if they were in the moment, like if a quarterback had won the Super Bowl. Okay. Nothing got an audience excited like a sports hero, whether it was football, Major League Baseball, basketball, Olympic heroes, because NBC covered the Olympics, hockey, whatever it was. Sports heroes were always a big ratings plus.
Hmm.
The other thing that was surprising is animal acts.
Okay.
Now, you don't see animal acts really on late night these days,
Right.
but they were always ratings gold. And I would actually say that our best guest in terms of ratings was Steve Irwin.
Hmm.
You remember that was the Aussie,
Mm-hmm.
the animal guy that was really funny, and he died a tragic death.
Yeah.
But we always had great ratings when Steve Irwin was on. He was like our number one guy. In fact, one time, do you remember when Martha Stewart served time in the big house?
Yeah.
For apparently it was insider trading.
Right.
When she got out 6 months later, she got booked on Letterman. She was in New York. She did Letterman, and we're thinking, we're dead. We're dead in the water because we had a situation one time. It took one show, and we did really well with it, and we passed up Letterman.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew that shows could turn around on a dime, and so what we did is we took our lineup that night and canceled them all, which was unthinkable. You didn't do that. When we made a promise to have somebody on, we stuck to the promise.
Right.
But we knew that we had to cancel the lineup, and we brought on an animal guy. It wasn't even Steve Irwin. It was an animal guy. And we beat Letterman by 500,000 people that night with animals.
Wow. Are people just wanting to see some kind of confrontation? Is that why they like animals? Like where you get bitten or you get chased, or what is the attraction, do you think?
I think it was, first of all, they were cute, and also Jay was fearless. He had no fear of, playing with, serious big cats or snakes or holding them or anything at all.
Wow.
Plus, they were just sort of unpredictable. You don't know what the animal's going to do sometimes.
Walk us through the process. So you sit down for your daily meeting or whatever it is, and how does it work? You pitch ideas of guests, you get suggestions, and then what would you do after you had a guest you got approval for?
Yeah, what would happen is the writers and producers, a lot of times we would just meet together and exchange ideas. We would give it. It was a very I don't want to say a family environment. Maybe that's not the term, but nobody really stood on their titles, right? If somebody had a good idea for a guest, like a writer, I was happy to take that idea, and they were happy to take my jokes. So we would often meet with the writers, but then after that, the producers would sit down and meet. And then the executive producer, her name was Debbie Vickers,
right,
would come in the room and meet with us for a little while. And then we would have Jay come in, or we would talk about ideas, what we should pitch to Jay. What should we pitch? And Debbie would have her list. She would have her list that she approved of. And then Jay would come in the room and we would pitch them to him. And I have to say, you have to be really willing to hear the word no.
Right.
Because if I was a baseball player, my batting average would have been about, instead of like 300 is a good batting average.
Right.
You get 3 hits out of 10 times at bat.
Right.
My batting average would have been about, 0.5.
Yeah, I get it.
Most ideas you're like throwing pasta on the wall, 100 pieces of pasta and maybe 3 stick.
Right. Yeah.
So you have to be used to that.
So you'd walk in or you go to your meeting and you would say, how about so-and-so? And you get shot down or you get accepted. And then once you get a yes, how would you go about booking that guest?
I would go through any window I could. And that was another difference between me and the other producers. To them, a Hollywood celebrity, you go to their publicist.
Right.
I don't think it's that challenging to, oh, okay, I'll get so-and-so. I'll call the publicist for so-and-so. But for guests like athletic stars or somebody that was in the news, you have to go through anybody you can. Now, I had the advantage of having worked at NBC News. So I had contacts basically in every NBC newsroom in the country.
Right.
As well as the resources of NBC Network News and CNBC.
But there was no internet back then, I don't think. So you really had to work the phones.
Yes. No, there wasn't an internet, although NBC sort of had a forerunner of it that they used within their system, but there was no internet per se, as you're
Google
talking
somebody's
about.
address or agent.
No, you could not do that.
Yeah, that was a lot of shoe leather, basically, a lot of detective work.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah. Well, this is how I knew there was a Dave Berg, even before I knew you. I remember seeing John McLaughlin, the guy who had a talk show back in the 90s. And then I saw Franklin Graham come on, Billy Graham's son. And I just thought, listen, I know Hollywood, you know Hollywood. That doesn't just happen. I'm like, there's somebody in that operation who doesn't have a bias against people like these, people that the heartland likes, basically. Because I can guarantee you, nobody, in most meetings, nobody sits around and goes, hey, how about Franklin Graham to be a guest? And so I sort of knew a Dave Berg was there before I met you. But give me, as an example, like the Franklin Graham one, sadly, there just wasn't a lot of balance in those days. But what was it like to book somebody like that? And how out of the norm was it? I'm sure you even felt that from your colleagues.
I did feel that, and I was a little worried, and that he may not have a sense of humor. And Jay was a little worried about it too. So that was one thing, but it turned out that he did have a sense of humor. For instance, Franklin Graham used to come to the town where I live, Santa Clarita, to have his there was a motorcycle shop here, and he used to love to visit that shop right here in Santa Clarita. So the guys in there had known him and said he was a really down-to-earth guy, and so that put me at ease a little bit too, and that helped me get a good contact to book him.
But were there any objections? Like, did people in the office go, why would we want that guy? He's too religious, or any of that?
Yes, I was constantly getting that, especially from people who had a more of a liberal bent, which was most of them. But I was able to get Jay's blessing. He once told me that he said, you and I don't necessarily have the same views, but I'm glad you're here. And it was really the writers more than the producers who sort of took me in as one of theirs. I had more of a relationship with them more than the producers for some reason, because they were used to writing, because Jay, he wanted monologue jokes from all perspectives. He was just going after the funny, whether it was liberals sometimes wrote the best conservative jokes.
Interesting.
Right? Because they knew they had to write those jokes because Jay wanted those types of jokes as well.
Interesting.
So I did get accepted by the writers first. And then I sort of, came to better terms with my producer colleagues.
That's so interesting.
And the guys down on the floor, the props guys, the camera guys, I don't need to tell you, they were all pretty conservative.
Right. So they were cheering some of your guests on. Did you ever?
Yes, they were. Yes, they would come up and say, "Good for you."
Did Did you ever have any that you couldn't get through that are memorable?
Any what now?
Any guests that you couldn't get through the system that were memorable?
Oh gosh, yes. I was very, very interested at a certain point after I had sort of booked all these presidential candidates, and Barack Obama is the first sitting president ever to do a late night show, and all these sports stars. And so my next goal was to start booking international figures.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to get Tony Blair, and he wanted to do it. He just couldn't work it out. We did get his wife, Sherry Blair, who was a real character.
Right.
But then I wanted to move out, and I tried to get Gorbachev.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he was living in or spending a lot of time in San Francisco, and his people were interested.
Right.
So I called him and explained what our show was about, and that this would be breaking a lot of barriers, and he would be doing himself a favor. The Americans would look at him in an entirely new light if he could come on the show and be funny.
Right.
Now I'm talking to him through an interpreter.
Yep.
And I said, Mr. Gorbachev, I just want to tell you, I know you're speaking in Russian, and I respect that, but I also know that you know English.
Uh-huh.
And I said, a joke, once it's explained, once it's translated, it dissipates into vapor.
Right.
It doesn't work. You've lost the joke. I need you to speak English.
There's no way he's going to do that.
He wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
He would not do it. Yeah. Not do it. Another person I really wanted was the King of Jordan.
Uh-huh. King Hussein.
I had read, what's that?
King Hussein?
King Hussein, who had a very attractive wife. She was an American, still does.
Right.
And her name is escaping me right now. But I had read about him.
Is it Queen Noor? Is it Queen Noor?
Yes. I had read about him that he was a big Jay Leno fan.
No kidding.
And he especially thought jaywalking was hysterical. And he loved it.
Yep.
And this was the bulk of this interview he did, this international interview. And so I reached out to his people, and it turned out he was really interested, and he really wanted to do the show. And so I pitched him, and I said, to everybody in the room, now we're not only talking about King Hussein, who's a really cool guy, but also his really hot wife. And I just wouldn't float. As well, nobody's going to care about the King of Jordan. I said, not even the Queen. They just didn't float.
Wow.
Couldn't get it to float.
Wow. Yeah, I asked Larry King one time when he was on my show, I was on his show, who he hadn't been able to get as a guest, and he said the Pope. He really wanted the Pope, but he just couldn't land the Pope. Even Larry King in his prime, Pope didn't want to play ball with him.
Right.
Well, that's fascinating. So, so you got to see, how many guests would you say you booked over your career? Do you have an estimate?
Well, you mean in individuals?
Yeah, the way that you were responsible for.
Yeah. Maybe 800 to 1,000.
Wow. And did any, what were your memorable moments? Just for me, I always was fascinated. I had a couple of different artists that I worked with were on the show at different times, artists, bands that I work with. But I'll never forget one time, which kind of gave me an insight into who Jay was. Remember when Howard Stern came on one time and he was on some rant, he began to tear up pages of the Bible. You remember this?
And, I remember it very well.
And Jay just seemed horrified, and he grabbed the Bible away from him as if, he was a Sunday school teacher or something. And it just gave you a little bit of an instinctual insight into who he was and where he came from in his upbringing, probably Catholic upbringing. Do you remember that? And what were your insights on that one?
Well, let's put it another way. I will never forget it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he didn't literally tear up the Bible, but he was besmirching the Bible.
Mm.
But what he did is now remember, we're going back in time to the 90s.
Right.
As I tell this story, because as I tell it, people may say, well, that's not really, out of the ordinary.
Right.
In today's standards.
Right.
What he did is, well, first of all, he was a guest on the show.
Right.
He had a relationship with NBC. He came on the show. And the other thing about Howard Stern is Howard Stern doesn't exist. That's a character.
Right. Right.
He's playing a character.
Yeah.
So backstage, he's working with you. Right? He's talking, will this work? And maybe we'll do this. Maybe we'll do this. Now, I didn't work with Howard Stern, so I really didn't have anything to do with this.
Right.
It wasn't my style of a guest.
Mm-hmm.
So he decides on his own, because the thing with a guy like Howard Stern, it's always about a gimmick, right? So you always have to have a bigger gimmick than the last time you were on.
Right.
So this time he figures on his own that he is going to stage on the Tonight Show the first lesbian kiss on broadcast television.
Okay.
So he sneaks in a couple of strippers into his dressing room. Now, I don't know how his producer working with him missed that. I'll just leave it at that. He sneaks in these two strippers who are going to play the lesbians.
Okay.
He comes out on stage and, they had prepared some material to go over. He did his thing about the Bible. And then he said that he was there to help Jay Leno get the highest ratings ever by staging the first lesbian kiss in the history of broadcast television. Right. He brings the girls out, all unbeknownst to Jay. How these girls got past the producer coming out of the dressing room, got past the stage manager backstage, walk out on the stage and do the kiss, I don't know. But here's what really happened. Jay walked off the set.
Mm.
He said, I'm not doing this show. And he walked off the set.
Wow.
Finally, he sort of calmed down and he came back on and we finished the show.
Mm.
But that would be a moment that I will never forget about Mr. Howard Stern, mm-hmm. for whom I do not have the greatest respect.
Mm. Mm. Well, in our remaining moments, I'd love to just pivot to Jay today, since you keep in touch. He wrote the foreword to the book, which was very generous of him. But he's making a different sort of news now with his wife. And I guess it's just because we're so used to being Hollywood stories where, once the person is no longer useful to you, you dump them, whether professionally or personally. But he keeps making news because he says it's an honor to take care of his wife as she slips into dementia. What are your thoughts on all that's going on there?
It just confirms for me what kind of a guy Jay Leno is and has always been. He's, again, the same guy in front of the camera as he is behind the camera. And he and Mavis loved each other. From the day he started out in Hollywood, he's living out of a car. He's, showing up at the comedy club, and she sees him and falls in love with him and supported him and stood by him from the word go. And loyalty means a lot to Jay. and he stood by her over the years, and they actually did love each other. And so when it came time in later years, when Mavis, it turns out, developed a kind of dementia, Jay decided, I'm going to stick by my wife. I'm going to take care of her. I'm going to take responsibility for her legally. I'm going to take care of her so that she never has to worry about anything. And he continues with his comedy career, but wherever he performs, he has one condition. Wherever he goes in the country, the condition is he has to be able to be back home that night so he can be home with Mavis to spend the evening.
Wow. And it seems like he's the primary caregiver too.
Yes, yes, he is.
Wow, it's incredible. Incredible. Well, Dave, thanks for giving us a little tour of your life and career. And of course, the book is called Behind the Curtain. What is the subtitle, Dave?
An insider's view of Jay Leno's Tonight Show.
Well, you definitely had that for many, many years. And of course, I'm honored to call you Fred, but thanks for being with us. And we will make sure everybody gets a copy of the book. And we'll see you again.
Thank you. You're very kind. Thank you for having me on, Mark.